Okay, so I promised you yesterday at the end of my other video that I was going to talk editing today. So to discuss editing, first I need to discuss with you how I write. The way that I write is actually a little bit different, I think, than the way a lot of people write, because what I was actually trained as a laboratory scientist, and it's very strange actually that I'm on the one hand I'm actually very analytical, black and white, like cold descriptions kind of thing, very step-by-step, procedural. On the other hand, I've always had this creative streak in me, and I've always loved art and drawing and reading and writing and anything that has to do with the imagination, so it's kind of this weird thing going on. But how I write basically is all to do with movies. I know it sounds weird, so just bear with me. When I'm imagining a story, in my head it's always like a movie. So like if I'll start with an idea, and like I'll imagine the idea as a picture, and as the idea evolves it becomes like a moving scene, kind of like, give me that, Sable, I'm gonna throw this toy, kind of like part of a movie. So the scene evolves as a fucking movie. And when I'm writing, what I'm really doing is being a scientist about a movie. So I'll imagine the scene, and then when I go to write it, I'm actually trying to describe exactly what I see accurately, so that whoever picks up my book sees what I see based on what I've written. And anyone who's done laboratory science would tell you that when you pick up somebody's lab notebook, what you're trying to be able to do is replicate exactly what they've done based only on what they've written. So that's how I've been able to incorporate my training into writing. That's my dogs again. They're playing tug of war. I told you. Every time I make a video, without fail. So that's how I craft my writing, is to imagine it like a movie, and then basically just write down what I'm observing. The trick to this is you need to be sure that everything that you're trying to convey about the scene is something that someone else who's completely detached from your story could also see only by reading what you've written down. So, I mean, like, if a hand gesture is very important to what's happening in your scene, you want to make sure you capture that accurately, so on and so forth. That's writing. Editing now. Hey guys, Sable. That's enough. Editing now is just to make sure that you've done that successfully. So, when I go about editing, there's a few things to consider. Firstly, I try to let some time pass between the time that I've written it and the time I go back to read it. I want it to kind of leave my brain as I've written it. I want to be able to go back to it as close to being new to it as I can, to simulate being a reader, to make sure that what I've written actually crafts the same picture that I was having when I wrote it. So usually what I'll do is I'll let some time pass before I go back and read it. I've mentioned before that the way my writing process works is I actually write a little bit, and then I go back to the beginning and I edit, and then I write a little bit more, and I go all the way back to the beginning and I edit it again. And like, it takes a little while, but by the time your story gets to be, so long, and then you go back to the beginning again, more time has passed, you've seen it more times, and the flaws, I think, are more evident. That's how I feel. So that's my writing process, and it just is an ever-growing loop. But when I do go back and edit, the first thing I do is read through it fast. And what I'm trying to do there is just to make sure that the scene fits everything that I wanted it to accomplish and reads. Then I read it slightly more slowly, and I read it in a conversation voice. So this again goes back to the movie thing. I'm actually I read fast, but I'm kind of a slow reader in comparison to some, because when I'm reading, what I'm actually doing is trying to imagine it in my head exactly as the writer intended. So I slow down. If someone is talking slowly, they're talking in my head slowly, and they always have a voice. In fact, I've mentioned before that my character Tarvindale, I read him in Crispin Freeman's voice. I can't think of an accurate voice to describe my other characters yet, but I'll get there, and when I do, I'll make sure that I let you know for sure. So when I'm reading, I slow down, and I hear the scene in my characters' voices, and I'm watching it unfold. And so a lot of people will tell you that when you're editing, you should read out loud, and I definitely recommend that. For me, I don't feel like I need to because I'm already kind of reading it aloud in my head. Now, I have learned that I think one of my characters needs to be renamed. She's a minor character, but her name looks pretty on paper, and I think it's awkward to say. So I think I'm going to change her name. I'm not going to mention her. It doesn't matter to you. Because if I tell you now, you'll just be confused later. So yeah. I slow down and I read it aloud in my head. And this is my first edit. My first, second, maybe even third edit I do this way. So that I slow it down and I'm recreating the scene in my head like a movie. What I'm doing right now, and the reason it's so tedious, is not like that. What I'm actually doing right now is teasing out all those tiny things that the grammar Nazis get you on. Stop that! Comma usage. Duplicating words. Using a word too often. Not using enough synonyms. Reiterating, meaning I've basically written the same thing twice in two different ways. Reorganizing my paragraphs to make sure that the strongest sentence in there is actually the topic sentence and that everything follows it relates to that. Because sometimes I find that when I'm trying to describe something, I start by describing it and then I kind of summarize it at the end. Let me shut that up. I kind of summarize it at the end and then I realize later that that little summary sentence really needs to be the topic sentence and I gotta reorganize it that way. I'm cutting out paragraphs I don't need. Scenes I don't need. I cut out an entire thread I don't need. A thread is like a theme that you're trying to carry throughout your entire story. I had a thread in there that I didn't even need. So I've been doing a little bit of research, and the mantra that keeps me going I mentioned in my video yesterday. Well, I mentioned it in the text actually. Don't use a single word that you don't need. So I end up cutting a bunch of things like that, though, was, were, would be, a bunch of things. I'm also trying to drop passive voice as much as I can. I tend to write a lot in passive voice, and I'm going back through and trying to make it a little bit more active wherever I can. So these tiny little things that when I was writing fanfiction I really didn't give a flying fuck about, I'm apparently very concerned with now, mostly because my first beta tore me apart on them, and I was like, oh, I feel like you're right and I don't want you to be. So that's kind of my editing process. I've cut out a bunch of scenes, as I said. I've cut out a bunch of paragraphs. I've reorganized paragraphs. I've rewritten scenes. I have not yet had to add an entire scene, but I feel like that's coming. And then, at this point, I've cut more than 10,000 words from my whole story. It was at 192,005, and now it's at just a little over 181,000 and about to dip below that. My goal is to be able to cut it to 150. I'm thinking that's a little optimistic, but I'm gonna give it the old college try. And yeah, so that's where I'm at. I don't know if I edit the way that other people edit, but basically I'm just trying to make sure that what I thought when I was writing it is what you get when you're reading it. I think that for an amateur who's never been published, I'm actually really good at that. After I had that talk with Frankie today, she, sort of reiterated that with me. Jory makes me feel that way too. The things that I'm trying to craft in my stories are coming through on the reader, so it's very encouraging. But I definitely recommend that you get at least another pair of eyes to look at your work before you ever try to submit it to anything. Because there are things that your brain fills in blanks for when you're reading your own work, that it really helps to have another set of eyes. Like, definitely like a fresh set of eyes, because I'll go back and I'll read my things and I'll think it sounds perfect, and I will send it to somebody else and they'll be like, who's talking here? That's another thing, is you want to make sure it's very clear in every one of your dialogue paragraphs exactly who's talking. Typically, I feel like if the paragraphs alternate, that it should be a pretty clear giveaway that you're switching between characters with each paragraph, but if it confuses somebody, you gotta consider that maybe it'll confuse others. I'm kind of rambling at this point, so I think I'm gonna stop there. I think that pretty much covers my general editing process. So I do a cold read, and then I do a semi-intermediate read in conversation voice in my brain. And right now what I'm doing is a highly tedious job of making sure my grammar is perfect. At the same time, I'm trying to do the other two things. It's a total pain in the ass. And then when I'm all done, of course, then I have to read it again. And then I have to make sure that my friends are understanding it at the same... Oh my gosh. This is why I'm having a hard time. I'm stressed myself out just talking about it. But anyway, you get the point. If you have any questions about editing or whatever, or if anything in this video confused you, just comment. I'm happy to answer. But I'm gonna go, because I'm pulling an all-nighter tonight. See the coffee? This is the beginning of... Actually, this is halfway through pot 2. So, and I had coffee at work today. So I'm riding the caffeine wave right now. I got work to do. I'm so sick of editing that I want it to be over like fucking yesterday. So I'm gonna stay up all night because I don't work tomorrow and work on that. So I actually have, except for this video right now, shut down all of my social media. That Skype bubble, totally ignored that. Gonna keep ignoring it. Twitter's down, Facebook's down, WordPress is down. This is my break for myself because I've already finished editing 2 chapters tonight, and I'm using this as a reward. That means I like you. So, I'm gonna continue to shut everything down and drink this coffee and probably make another pot soon. And I'm gonna try to bang this thing out. So, this is my Friday video so that I don't have to vlog tomorrow. And I can just post this. And, I'll let you go. So good luck with all your stuff. And wish me luck on mine. Cheers.